Hey there everyone, Sal here, and today I have something different to present. Many of you have probably found this channel due to the FEE3 trailer, for which I am very thankful. The reception blew me away. I hope to have an update for Daybreak very soon. Today I'd like to take a look at designs, but not like the shorts which have sadly stagnated a bit. Today we're looking at the design of the soldier through the Fire Emblem series. We'll look at historical inspiration, credibility in the various settings of Fire Emblem, and of course we'll take a deeper dive into some of the more notable soldiers in Fire Emblem itself. Even though soldiers first appeared in Fire Emblem Gaiden, we'll look at Marth's games first. Mystery of the Emblem featured soldiers as an enemy-only class, usually replacing cavaliers and paladins on maps that were indoors. Due to the limitations of the older games, we don't have a lot of artwork or sprite work to go off. However, the DS games will shed a bit more light on that down the road. In Mystery of the Emblem, the portrait of the soldier class shows an armet as a helmet with a slitted visor. For the torso they wear what appears to be laminar armor, which in combination with the armet may lean on some Italian inspiration for the design. In the portrait no pauldrons or spaulders can be seen, but in the battle animations the soldier displays quite large round pauldrons. Neither animation nor portrait feature any vambraces, and aside from the chestplate, no other defensive gear is worn around the torso. Lastly, we see tassets to protect the hips, and greaves on the legs and a metal codpiece to protect the groin. Ironically, the codpiece is not that useful when riding on horseback, so if the implication was that the cavaliers and paladins dismounted, the riding would not be a comfortable experience. The soldiers from Mystery of the Emblem seem under-equipped in their portraits, but sport a fuller set of armor in combat. They're quite slow and don't seem to have a great amount of maneuverability when in combat. For Gra's garrison stationed at Sheena's side, this would be apt, as Gra is vulnerable and in bad shape because of all the conflict during FE3. This can be seen in the chapter Gra's Sun Sets. This would show an excellent case of consistency with the story. If their armor were regular equipment, I'd consider them a bit ill-suited for war, especially when looking at their class portrait. Shadow Dragon and New Mystery feature the soldier class in a few more places, such as the prologues in both games. The soldiers are better equipped, sporting a breastplate instead of the laminar plates, as well as a tunic underneath that could be made from wool or some other fabric. This fabric is also used to protect the soldier's legs. The pauldrons have more detail and offer greater flexibility. This is also seen in the swifter and more agile movement of the battle animations. Curiously enough, the helmet design has shifted to a barbute, which is reminiscent of the ancient Greek helmets. Weirdly though, the class portrait shows a movable visor piece with a ridge in the middle. It seems the duality has shifted from pauldrons to helmet with the remakes. Arcania's soldiers are the quintessential soldier in the Fire Emblem series. The soldier has often been presented as a generic enemy mook, and Arcania's soldiers are the white toast among their soldier brethren. Though visually not that interesting, they also don't break immersion and fit decently well within the world of Arcania. Going back in time again, we arrive at Valentia. Here we start with Gaiden, the first time soldiers were introduced within the Fire Emblem series. Soldiers are one of the promotions from the villager class. Soldiers promote into knights in Gaiden, upon which they gain a tremendous amount of armor compared to their unpromoted form. Soldiers are unremarkable in Gaiden, as Gaiden soldiers lack any distinct features. Their battle sprite seems to show strapped breastplate, and they might wear a helmet and tassets, but it could also be their hair and a short tunic made of fabric. We can't say much about them sadly. The villager, however, fares even worse, wearing even less protective gear. Lastly, there is the Fire Emblem TCG, which depicted the soldier, but that one differs as well, sporting only pauldrons and a helmet, and just a tunic for their torso. A visually more interesting design features in Shadows of Valentia. Shadows of Valentia's armor shows great detail and is visually distinct from most other games. Not only that, but it is also one of, if not the most realistic armor set that we have seen in the Fire Emblem series to date, at least for the lance-wielding infantry units. In Shadows of Valentia, Soldier is once again one of the possible promotions from the villager class. Villagers wear a light fabric tunic and almost no protective material. Their mishmash ensemble fits the role the class is supposed to represent perfectly. When promoting to Soldier, they gain a coherent armor set with helmet, breastplate, pauldrons, vambraces, tassets and more. The leather straps to fasten the gear add an extra sense of realism, and the quilted tunic underneath provides extra support. The helmet seems to be fashioned after the kettle hat, though these had slits in the steel rim for the eyes more often than a separate piece to cover the face. The soldiers in Shadows of Valentia look splendid, perfectly balancing the realism that is set up for Shadows of Valentia with the classic Fire Emblem feel. Soldiers can promote into knights and barons, though these function as armored units and will be discussed in a later video. They do, however, have an overclass, the Spartan. Barons can promote into Spartan at the altar of the Titan, and they bring an over-the-top version of the classic idea of the Spartan to Fire Emblem. A big feathered mohawk on their helmet, dressed in over-the-top, almost ornamental golden armor, wielding a golden shield with the face of a lion, and even sporting openings for the spear to push through without having to lower their guard. The openings are over the top, but it does convey the theme of the class very well. Personally, however, I am not the greatest fan of its inclusion, as it stays too close to the real world and feels a bit out of place within the game. That is to say, the Spartan implies the existence of ancient Greece's culture specifically within Valentia. Any army has regular soldiers, but this one is so specific that it feels out of place, at least to me. I love the design itself, but it breaks my immersion a bit when playing. In Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia we have playable soldiers, in the form of Lucas and Forsyth. Both aren't all that interesting in Gaiden, sporting the standard breastplate and shoulder pads over a tunic most Fire Emblem designs have had back in the day. In Shadows of Valentia, however, Lucas is clearly already part of the Deliverance. It also shows that he is above the standard soldier ranks. His armor is more detailed and his clothing is of higher quality than the standard military issue. He also does not have any trinkets or ornaments, firmly cementing him as a down-to-earth and relatable character. For the first soldier in the series, he certainly has had his glow up and he looks splendid. Forsyth is like Lucas in that he has also had quite a transformation, now sporting quite a bit more armor than his first appearance. Of the two, Forsyth differs most from the generic enemy soldiers. His pauldrons are wider and he wears longer greaves. Forsyth lacks a bit of the contrast with his greens compared to what Lucas has had with his lighter and darker shades of red, though Forsyth comes across as diligent and dependable, with a great design that clearly fits him in with the soldier class. From here, we go to Jukral, Alib, and Magvel. These are dark time for the soldier class. Once again, an enemy-only class, the soldiers started to become the punching bag of the franchise. In Genealogy of the Holy War and Thracia 776, soldiers take on the design that they would carry all the way to New Mystery of the Emblem. The biggest design change between these games is that they do not carry the small round shield this time, and instead carry large heater shields. Heater shields would often be depicted with one's coat of arms, or a cross to signify one's religious beliefs and allegiance. In the GBA games, there is not much to say about soldiers. They are literal punching bags and XP deposits for your army to fight. Their design is incredibly similar to the aforementioned soldiers from the DS era. I would have loved to see a slight change between Magvel's soldiers and Alib's soldiers, just to show that the design is different for each continent. Showing different cultures that influence the design of your army's equipment would have been a nice touch, but I get why they didn't do it back in the day. The soldier animation does its job adequately, but I'd be lying if I said that the animation wasn't miles behind some of the things animators have made from ROM hacking. There are two soldiers in Magvel, however, that stand out, and one of them is good old Emilia. Emilia is a perfect example of a character and animation being perfectly in sync. The slight wobble and uneven stance, the leaning on the spear, it all conveys the fact that she is unexperienced and ill-suited for war. Emilia is a great fit for the zero to hero experience, and her promoting into a knight gives that slight comical edge. You train Emilia to see her go from a nervous recruit to a terror on the battlefield, and the sudden shift from slender frame to a hulking mass of armor is just enough comedy to accentuate the visual evidence of her progress. So shout out to Emilia. Whatever class she becomes, her recruit class is a fantastic piece of character consistency. The other soldier is one of the main characters, Ephraim. Where Emilia is unsteady and meek, Ephraim is brazen and forges forward. The difference in their animations are night and day. Ephraim's design features well-made armor with accents and details, an embroidered cape and sturdy clothes. The full cover and use of leather gloves for protection is a nice touch, and his emphasis on guerrilla tactics explains the lightness in his armor. Needing to move quickly around, it's a solid design with no clear faults in my opinion. We'll forge ahead to Tellius, and yes, I'm biased, I acknowledge that. The soldier, however, does not really make the cut, at least not the generic enemy design. The generic enemy is still roughly the same as the previous entries, but it does not take full advantage of the shift to 3D and only sports a massive increase in detail in the portrait arts, of which there are multiple. This detail makes the design almost entirely function over form. The Path of Radiance design is quite basic, especially with the 3D model, which actually loses shield. I do wish we would have gotten the concept art design instead, though the different portraits for the soldier design do show a difference in rank, which is very cool. It's in Radiant Dawn that the design has its best iterations. Belts, buckles and straps clearly visible, strengthening the design just like we discussed during Shadows of Valentia. The armor allows for flexible movement whilst offering a great deal of protection. After having had an armet and a barbute for a helmet, the design now adopts what in my opinion most closely resembles a mixture between the burgonet, which can have the point at the back of the head, and the softened T-shaped of the barbute. I'm not entirely sure, but let me know in the comments if there's a better fit. This alone does not make the design that interesting yet. It's practical and realistic, but Radiant Dawn has a great bit of world building within the design as well. All nations have the same army design, but there are accents in the armor sets that differentiate them, as well as the color schemes being different. Even the rebel soldiers in Crimea wear armor that is rough around the edges and has physical wear and tear. That's excellent world building, just like the insignia being different for each soldier's shield. It's these small changes and differences that firmly place this iteration of the soldier as a contender with Shadows of Valentia for the top spot. The soldier has two promotions in Tellius, the first one being the halberdier. Halberdiers are better equipped with additional pieces of armor to give more accents and shape. The helmet now slots with a few segments over the neck, the pauldrons end higher and the shoes and legs are well protected. Halberdiers genuinely feel like an upgrade when compared to soldiers. Just like with soldiers, halberdiers feature small differences in the accents on the armor and fabric. Their colors are also more vibrant, or in Dayan's case, an intenser shade of black. A fantastic design that eventually promotes into the third tier class of Sentinel. We'll get to Sentinels in a bit though, as Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn also feature the return of playable soldiers. The first one is Nephany, first seen in the prison cell together with Brom. Both are fresh recruits with barely any training, having just joined the militia. This is visible in Nephany's attire. She doesn't have a complete set of armor, her vambraces are replaced with bound cloth, and the straps normally holding her tassets are loose as she does not have any. Once again, a great piece of immersive character building, and even better, when she promotes into the halberdier class, she gains a full set of armor that isn't cobbled together from scraps. Her helmet and pauldrons match, she gains the tassets and no longer has any straps dangling loose. Even her tunic is entirely new, with the cloth around the arm also being new and well bound. I do miss greaves and more protection for the stomach and thighs, but as far as believability goes, this is quite decent. It also has the same progression that Emilia had, being a low-level soldier that seems entirely too unsure of herself as someone on the battlefield, having low weapon ranks and stats, only then to promote into what looks like a formidable seasoned warrior. Nephany takes more serious tone with the transformation, whereas Emilia could go from small recruit to hulking knight, Nephany keeps her promotion firmly grounded, which fits the story and world of Tellius perfectly. In Radiant Dawn, she wears basically her promoted Path of Radiance armor. It's a shame she doesn't carry over the pants and greaves that the other halberdiers wear. Being from a countryside village, it's not too strange to assume that she has worked on the farms, and that's also work you generally want sturdy clothes for. It takes away a few points in my opinion, but overall I think the design is still solid. In Path of Radiance we also see Devdan, who starts out as a halberdier. Devdan's design differs only slightly from the base halberdier design, as his pauldrons are large and flat. The striking difference is of course his color palette. The orange is not seen anywhere else amongst halberdiers, and there is no country that associates itself with the orange armor that he wears. Benyon comes closest with the red. In Radiant Dawn we have Danvet, who is most certainly not Devdan. Danvet also does not have a massively different armor from the generic halberdier. But it is a nice detail that his robes see quite a bit of wear and tear. As his ending card states, he is a wayfarer, and we know that he has travelled across Tellius. Of course, we first see him in Benyon, and as he travels with Ike during the Mad King's War, he eventually settles in Crimea. How he ended in Oliver's mansion, or rather, where he came from beforehand, we might not know the full story. The last playable soldier in Tellius is the least interesting one design-wise, Aran. Aran wears the basic soldier attire, but blue. His design is no different from generic enemies. The same is true for his promoted classes, aside from the shield having a unique emblem on the front. This is the case for Nefni and Danfat as well. There's also a few enemy halberdiers in the games that deserve a quick mention. All of them sport a differently colored halberdier armor set, though the armor itself stays pretty much the same. In Path of Radiance we see Emil, who is the first promoted boss you fight. Then we have Kotaf and Hafed. Neither boss has any distinctive design aspects aside from the slightly different colors. In Radiant Dawn, we cannot ignore Jared, the main antagonist from Part 1. His color scheme is a more vibrant red, almost dipping into purple. In 3-1, there's the boss Romet, also not that noteworthy. And lastly, we have Rourke. Rourke is the only one actually worth talking about a bit more, though sadly not in a good way. Why are you leading Benyon soldiers in what looks to be Dayan military armor? The black and grey is a signature color for Dayan. It actually straight up is Dayan armor if we look at the golden accents. These perfectly match the Dayan armor style instead of the Benyon armors. Just a weird design choice all around. Maybe he got it as a spoils of war? Maybe he was intended to be a Dayan boss at some point? We may never know. That's it for enemy halberdiers, however, so let's head back to the playable characters. All three playable characters can promote into Sentinel, and there's also one Sentinel that we fight as an enemy, Leville. Leville and Aran are color swaps and even feature the same shield design and armor accents. Danfat retains his signature orange color scheme and even keeps the slightly tattered robes. He's also the only one to not wear a helmet out of the four. Nefni is visually the most distinct, though in my opinion once again for the wrong reasons. All four Sentinels are heavily armored from top to bottom, except Nefni's bare legs. Just like her halberdier design, and it just doesn't seem practical or mesh well with what the rest of the design is trying to convey. It's not something that ruins the whole design, but the males win in the coherency department. The one thing the Sentinel class goes all out on, and which puts it a bit more in the fantasy department compared to the reasonably grounded halberdiers, is the helmet. The helmet always looks like an alien xenomorph skull to me, elongated and slender. The segments run all the way to the back. A design choice that gives the class a bit of extra, to push it a bit over the top without looking weird. The armor is still coherent and feels like it belongs in Tellius, whilst also managing to have a signature look that you can't find in other games. It is far from actual medieval armor, but it does not break immersion from the world of Tellius itself. A fantastic class, and I fully understand why people like the class itself so much. It's great to finally have the playable soldiers in the West, and see them class change into the Sentinel class is a damn good feeling. The generic enemy design changes with Awakening. After so long, the design takes a drastic turn. Awakening soldiers wear what appears to be a Morion. The Morion comes a bit closer compared to the pikeman spot, which has less pointed rims and is generally more rounded on the top. The cool thing about the Awakening soldiers is that they also have a female model concept art. Aside from the almost mandatory fantasy boob plate armor, which is just not that useful for deflecting arrows the right way at all, the design stays quite similar to the men. I really like this choice as both designs put more focus on garments and cloth to cover the body than the previous games. But they are still well armored, and the overcoats could realistically be useful for insignias and such to display allegiance. Lastly, the shield is now not held, but strapped to the arm. A nifty design choice, though I wish we would see more of it used in combat animations to pummel the enemy with a backward swipe. There's also a class akin to the Gaiden Villager, Donald's personal starting class. I really dislike Donald's design, which is also the Villager class design. I get the idea behind it, and no doubt it has happened in real life, but as soon as the threat of the attack on Donald's village was over, he'd be able to join Crom and get a functional helmet. It's a meme character, but I find the execution extremely poor. Lastly, we have the Merchant class. Though technically not a soldier, they do only wield lances and are an infantry class. Anna is the typical merchant, with a long robe that fits many items and knickknacks, and probably a few bags of gold. They're decent designs, though ill-suited for combat with light protection. There's one, however, that goes above and beyond. That is Apotheosis Anna. Apotheosis Anna is the biggest, baddest boss in Awakening, sporting no protective gear, just a simple tunic and a box with enough weapons to supply an army for days. For a secret final boss, this is great. Anna has been seen through the series, doing many different things over the series course. To see her now decked out with skills such as Rightful God and Dragon Skin, and her not being even slightly concerned about her lack of protection, it's a great visual twist. The greatest foe is a lady selling weapons in casual wear. It's silly and ridiculous, and when placed in the story of Awakening it wouldn't work. But within the Xenologue realms, where logic and world-building consistency needs less focus, this is a fantastic end to a set of challenging maps. There's a time and place for everything. Silly enemies feel out of place in things like the Heirs of Fate DLC, but Apotheosis carries just enough silliness in its premise that it works. Moving on, Fates doesn't stray too far from the Awakening design for Nor. The generic Lancer is quite a bit more muscular and intimidating than the Awakening variant, but other than their physical appearance, their outfits don't change much. Fates features 3 playable spear fighters, as the Lancer only has generics. There is also Mozu, another villager who wields lances, and Azura deserves a quick mention, being a lance-wielding dancer. She'll be featured whenever dancers are up. Out of the spear fighters, Oboro is the first. Oboro's design is, funnily enough, not that different from the generic spear fighter. Normally, that wouldn't be an issue. However, a significant part of Oboro's identity is her love for fashion and creating garments. I'd have liked to see a slightly less conventional outfit. Her design is functional, with the breastplate also having the detail of the Hoshidan emblem as well, but it does not convey her passion for fashion. Her design does slot in well with the Hoshidan aesthetic and offers enough maneuverability in combat. Shiro isn't all that different either, though he does stand out due to his asymmetric design. The knot tied around his shoulder and the loose ends of his ribbons contrast the attention to detail that Oboro has. Just like Oboro, Shiro has a straightforward design that slots well within Hoshido and its Japanese inspiration. Lastly, there is Haitaka, and though a visually interesting unit due to his age and pose compared to the generic portrait, he does not feature anything noteworthy as far as his armor goes. All spear fighters can promote into either the Basara or the Spear Master. Basara can access to scrolls and stand out visually compared to the Spear Master. The mask, robe and tiger patterned fabrics add a fantastical element to the design, changing it from being a unit that merely wields lances. I would have liked to keep the Hoshidan emblem visible in the portrait art. The way it is now feels like quite a big leap, especially from Spear Fighter. Basara can promote from Spear Fighter or Diviners, but I see little continuity in the design. It goes a bit too far into the fantastical direction and loses its ties to the unpromoted classes. This could be alleviated by giving the unpromoted classes a small adjustment in their design to tie the whole set together a bit more. The generic spear fighter could have used the red and white pattern for the rope holding the helmet in place, and maybe the mask could have featured in the Diviner's portrait. As it stands, Basara feels a little bit too disconnected from their origin points, even if they don't feel unrealistic within Hoshido itself. The Spear Master, in contrast, keeps their ties to the Spear Fighter well. With its ties firmly rooted in Hoshido, it is no surprise to see the emblem feature even more. Spear Masters don't feel like such a departure from the Spear Fighter as the Basara, keeping the chestplate and tunic roughly the same, but opting for a more elaborate headgear and the flag worn on the back. Moving back to the villager class, Mozu is a villager done right. Just a regular girl that managed to survive the attack on her village. Ordinary clothes, no pots on their head, great and simple. Three Houses sadly suffers from a system where everyone can be a soldier, so no specific designs exist. The soldier design itself is solid. For the first time, a bever is used for the soldier as well, covering their neck and chin. A thick pair of boots, pants and a long tunic leave ample room for mobility, albeit a less defended than most soldiers in the series. They make up for it with the torso. Fully packed, they are armored from the neck to the waist. As said before, a solid design and fitting for a basic class in Fodlan. There's also Dimitri's personal classes, those being High Lord and Great Lord. The High Lord design being an absolute banger of a design. All black, leaning on Eredbar, Dimitri is buckling under the pressure. His armor is covering him from head to toe, with the cape retaining his sense of royalty and enlarging his frame and body shape. Great Lord shifts his stance to a firm pose with his chest forward, head held high. The darker tones now making way for lighter colors, though not entirely gone. There are still a few black feathers, and under the shiny steel is still some darker gear. The biggest change is the High Lord's lack of emphasis on the shoulders, whereas the Great Lord has large pauldrons. The fact that he can now shoulder the burden and weight that he was carrying is splendid showcasing of character development through design. His design in Three Hopes has gold accents instead of darker undertones, setting the black more into the cape. The details on the armor are great, and the addition of chainmail is fantastic. I hope chainmail gets used more often in character designs. Though Three Hopes is a Muso game and the animations are over the top, I wouldn't be surprised if a one-on-one recreation of this armor set would be quite functional in real life. It seems flexible enough to move around in freely. I really like it. Dimitri has fantastic armor design. Throughout all iterations his armor is believable, stays in character and fits perfectly within the world of Fodlan. Other than that, I won't go into detail regarding playable units, though one soldier deserves a special mention and some in-depth commentary on his design. The Gatekeeper. Regarding Gatekeeper's design, I have nothing to report.
It's time to engage. Emblem, engage!
Now, we move on to the final few games. First off, we have Engage. Engage hasn't shown us much yet, but we do see generic soldier design for at least one country in the trailer. The armor is a lot more jagged than previous entries, with horns featuring prominently on the helmet, pauldrons and breastplate. Is this practical in actual battle? No. These openings aren't useful when trying to avoid injury. Do they look cool? Certainly. They're distinct and it certainly has me excited to see the rest of the classes in Engage. For now, I can't really say if their design would take me out of the flow of the game, but I suspect that there will be a coherent design philosophy and the soldier is probably a great baseline to build upon. For now, we'll have to wait and see what Engage will bring. I know I've featured Itsuki for the next title, but he is mostly here to generalize spin-off titles and other products that feature Fire Emblem content such as Cypher. In Sessions itself, no soldiers appear, so we'll get to Sharp FE another time. For now, let's move on. In the first Warriors game, we get to see the generic soldiers as well. I have to retract my earlier statement, as these soldiers are literal punching bags, and they're meant to be punched by the hundreds. Truly the worst soldiers around. Since Warriors features so many characters from other titles, their own culture and identity is left a bit muddled. Soldiers are well equipped, but don't have many noteworthy attributes aside from the first use of the Spangen helm as headwear. It's fun to see so many different helmets being used throughout the series.
Woo! Fire Emblem Heroes!
Woo! It's Heroes that closes the door today, and the Blue Lance Fighter is our final generic design to look at. Heroes has a very homogeneous design, with nearly all enemies featuring scaled armor and emblematic shields. The generic enemies are amongst the most well covered and armored units, though this does not translate to their stats. I like the addition of the wings to the helmet, but the heels are just a bad design choice. Though it is Heroes, so I guess if there's ever a place where it would be appropriate, it would be here. As for characters native to Asker and the other realms, we have Shirena, Fjorm and Not. Shirena wears the traditional Askren white and gold garb. Her gear is not that dissimilar from the standard generic enemy in Heroes, though I find it baffling that as a trivia point, she claims to not like showing off her legs, and then only has shorts and no folds or tassets. The heels are not that bad, roughly on par with cowboy boots, so for riding these would be actually quite suitable. Shirena's design is fine, with a bit of asymmetry to create a more dynamic pose for battle and decent amount of protective gear. Especially the abdomen being covered is a plus. Fjorm's attire compared to Shirena seems a lot more ceremonial. The ice accentuation and the niffle emblems are nice touches, but her only real armor pieces are the vambraces and pauldrons, which look oversized due to the lack of other armor. A fine design, trying to evoke a swan on an ice lake according to the design notes, but ill-suited for combat in my opinion. However, it's nothing compared to the next one, as Not makes even less sense. Wearing almost no armor whatsoever, for someone who willingly would want to fight their sister to determine the rightful heir to the throne, she seems ill-prepared. I'm not a fan of the design, though if there were a reasoning for her to dress so minimalistic on the battlefield, it could be attributed to her air of lofty arrogance. A poor excuse if you ask me. And that about wraps up the Soldier and its related classes and characters. I hope you've all enjoyed looking at class designs over the course of the franchise. Soldiers are among the least featured regarding playable units, so anytime they do pop up, it's always a treat to play with them. Soldiers, in my opinion, tend to be relatively tame in their designs, which works well with their role as a generic mook. But there are some absolute bangers in there, for playable units as well as generics. For now, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a like or subscribe. I can't promise a follow-up video soon, as I do have to work on Radiant Dawn Daybreak as well. And if you're interested in that, there's a link in the description to my recent FEE3 trailer and my FE10 modding Discord. Lastly, a minor point. Whilst editing the video, I ended up using only male heads from heroes for the turn wheel. I'd like to change this for the next time, since there's plenty of female leads that could be placed there as well. During editing, however, I just got fed up with having to edit the different hair pieces, whereas the men just had a single head to worry about. If you want, please leave a comment with a character you'd like to take a slot on the wheel for next game. They'll have to be in heroes, but it can be any unit. I can't promise to get it next time, but I'll try. For now, thank you all for watching, and please remember to play around the critical hit. See you next time, Sal out.